When the bullets stop, the thinking begins. And in São Paulo, he was the man who did the thinking. São Paulo, 1958. Willians Herbas Camacho was born into a Brazil that forgot its poor. A city of concrete and smoke, where children learned hunger before hope. His world was built on broken promises. Fathers vanished, mothers prayed, and the streets raised the rest. He was one of them, a boy with nothing to lose and everything to prove. In the alleys of Carandiru and the outskirts of Osasco, he watched men disappear into the system. The rich lived above the law, the poor lived beneath it. It was there, in that brutal classroom, that Marcola discovered the truth. Rules were made to be rewritten. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a survivor. And survival, in São Paulo's underbelly, meant learning how to bend fear into power. By 14, he was already a street mechanic, stripping stolen cars for cash. By 16, he was running with neighborhood crews, small-time thieves, wild and reckless, chasing adrenaline instead of tomorrow. But even then, there was something different about him. He didn't shout, didn't drink, didn't brag. He listened. He calculated. While others robbed for shoes, he was studying the chain, how money moved, who controlled it, who got paid last. The police called him a delinquent. The system called him hopeless. But behind those cold eyes was a student of order. He read newspapers left in trash bins, memorized headlines about politics and prisons. He saw that corruption wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the system. And if crime was already business, then business could be organized. He started seeing the city like a chessboard. Each favela a piece, each cop a move, each prison a school. Arrests didn't scare him, they were invitations. When he was first locked up, he didn't resist. He watched. Inside, he saw chaos. Hundreds of men with anger, but no direction. To him, it wasn't failure. It was potential. The walls didn't confine him. They defined him. Marcola began to understand that power didn't come from muscle. It came from structure. He saw the difference between gangs that burned fast and those that learned patience. In São Paulo's prisons, he started building quiet alliances. Ex-enemies became contacts. Guards became assets. Every punishment was another lesson. Every cellmate, another recruit. By his 20s, he was fluent in 2 languages, violence and logic. He spoke softly, but with authority. He could calm riots or start them. His influence spread like smoke, unseen, but everywhere. The streets began to whisper his name, not with fear, but with respect. Marcola, a name that meant order inside the disorder. He knew Brazil's cities were exploding. Millions of poor, no work, no justice. It was a pressure cooker waiting to blow. Politicians didn't see it, or pretended not to. But he did. He saw the opportunity in chaos. He saw the future, a future where the forgotten could become a force. He didn't dream of escaping poverty. He wanted to control it, to weaponize it, to turn the system's own neglect into his empire's foundation. And it began with one simple idea. If the state can't rule the prisons, then we will. São Paulo would remember his name. Not as a gangster, not as a thief, but as the mind that turned survival into a science and crime into command. 1990s. Brazil's prisons were overcrowded, violent, and forgotten. Metal doors screamed, guards barked orders, and men rotted in cells built for half their number. But inside those walls, something was changing. The chaos was no longer random. It was organizing. And in the middle of that transformation stood one man, Willians Herbas Camacho, known now simply as Marcola. He had entered prison like countless others, young, angry, nameless. But he refused to remain another statistic. Where others saw confinement, he saw control. He watched the guards, the routines, the systems that were supposed to keep men broken. He memorized their schedules, studied their weaknesses, learned who could be bribed, who could be persuaded. He understood that the real weapon inside those walls wasn't a blade, it was influence. In 1993, a bloodbath shook Carandiru prison. More than 100 inmates were massacred by police. The state called it order restored. But for the men inside, it was a declaration of war. Out of that smoke and rage, the Primero Comando de Capital, the first command of the capital, was born. Most saw it as vengeance, a brotherhood of the condemned. Marcola saw something else, the foundation of an empire. He was not among the founders, but when he joined, he brought what the others lacked: vision. While others spoke of rebellion, he spoke of governance. While they dreamed of escape, he dreamed of structure. To him, the PCC was not a gang. It was an organization, a living system that could outthink the state. Inside his cell, he began mapping it out. Communication lines, regional commands, codes of conduct. Every rule was written with precision. Every punishment had purpose. He transformed rage into order. Under Marcola's quiet direction, the PCC grew. Members began paying monthly contributions, the cebola, the onion money, that funded lawyers, weapons, and support for families of the imprisoned. They weren't just criminals anymore. They were citizens of an underground republic. Marcola enforced discipline the way generals enforce loyalty. He banned senseless killings, demanded respect among members, and created a code that bound them tighter than blood. The prisons became laboratories of power. Through smuggled phones and coded letters, the PCC extended its reach beyond the walls. Street gangs who once fought each other now followed centralized commands. Dealers paid taxes to the organization. Conflicts were resolved through PCC arbitration, not bullets. Even rival groups began to mimic their structure. In a country where the government ruled the streets by day, the PCC ruled them by night. The guards didn't understand how it happened. The warden didn't see it coming. A man behind bars was commanding hundreds of free men, and he did it without shouting, without showing his face. Marcola's philosophy spread like smoke. We are not bandits. We are a system. He studied every leader who came before him: dictators, revolutionaries, thinkers. He admired their control but despised their arrogance. In prison, he found the perfect paradox: total isolation and total influence. No one could touch him, yet his word could move armies. His enemies were outside, but his power was inside. By the late 1990s, PCC's presence was undeniable. They had infiltrated public institutions, corrupted police forces, and reached into every favela in São Paulo. Politicians spoke of reform. Marcola built networks. The state talked about justice. He delivered efficiency. In a world of chaos, he offered order, and men followed order. He wasn't a king surrounded by soldiers. He was an architect surrounded by ideas. Every riot, every strike, every smuggled phone was part of a larger design. And as years passed, prisons across Brazil fell quietly under his command. What began as a movement of the desperate became a machine of power. From his small, dark cell, Marcola didn't just rise. He redefined what it meant to rule. He proved that bars don't break ambition. They focus it. And while the government looked outward for enemies, their greatest strategist was already inside, waiting, watching, and building a new kind of empire. One that needed no throne, no crown, and no freedom to reign. Marcola never trusted chaos. To him, chaos was for the weak, for men without vision, for fools chasing adrenaline. Power, he believed, came from rules, discipline, structure. Inside his cell, surrounded by concrete and steel, he built something that most governments couldn't: a system that worked. He understood one thing better than anyone: fear is powerful, but order lasts longer. While the state ruled with force, he ruled with logic. Every man under the PCC had a duty, a purpose, a defined place in the chain. No one acted alone. Every cell inside and outside the walls was part of a larger design, connected through phones, messages, and trust. His lieutenants knew the rules: no unnecessary violence, no random killings, no arrogance. Power had to look invisible to survive. From inside his isolation cell, Marcola turned the prison network into a living organism. His messages were written on cigarette paper, hidden in food, or sent through lawyers who carried orders disguised as legal notes. Those messages shaped the rhythm of São Paulo's underworld. Street-level dealers took instructions from commanders who took orders from men who never left their cells. The hierarchy was absolute. Every payment, every hit, every shipment of stuff moved with military precision. He introduced taxes, monthly contributions collected from members inside and outside prison. These funds paid for lawyers, funerals, and families left behind. It wasn't charity, it was investment. A man who knew his family would be protected didn't betray. Loyalty was built not on fear alone, but on stability. Marcola had turned crime into administration. In his view, the PCC was not an organization of criminals. It was a government in exile. He called prisons universities of crime, but what he truly meant was universities of control. Behind bars, he built schools of discipline. Rules replaced rage. Strategy replaced instinct. The men who once acted out of desperation now followed orders with precision. Marcola had turned chaos into calculus. His philosophy spread across Brazil's prisons like scripture. He ordered members to read, to study, to think. He quoted philosophers, revolutionaries, and military strategists. He believed ideas were sharper than knives, and words could kill more silently than bullets. When reporters later called him the thinker, they were right, but they didn't realize what he was thinking about. Domination through order. Each favela under PCC influence followed the same code. No stealing from neighbors, no abuse, no senseless killing. Anyone who broke the code vanished. But those who obeyed lived better than before. The PCC enforced peace where the state could not. Families slept at night not because the police protected them, but because the command allowed it. Fear had become security. Extortion had become government. By the early 2000s, Marcola AS influence stretched from São Paulo and S maximum security cells to border towns in Paraguay and Bolivia. Every operation, pot, powder, dope, or crystal, was regulated like a corporate trade. Trucks, boats, and couriers all moved under strict accounting. Mistakes were punishable. Efficiency was rewarded. He had taken the logic of capitalism and fused it with the ruthlessness of prison life. He didn't care for fame. He avoided cameras, avoided excess. He understood that power works best when it's invisible. While politicians gave speeches about security, his men negotiated with cops, judges, and businessmen. The PCC wasn't hiding from the system. It was woven into it. Marcola's genius was simple. He turned fear into policy. His commandments were clear. Never act without purpose, never show weakness, never trust chaos. He once said to a visitor, "We are not against the system. We are the system they refuse to see." In São Paulo, the state ruled by day. But when the sun went down, his order began. The city was divided between two governments, one with uniforms, one with tattoos, and from a small cell, deep inside a fortress of steel, a man with no army, no freedom, and no face ruled them both. May 12, 2006. São Paulo woke to fire, smoke, and the sound of sirens. The city had never felt this level of chaos, this kind of orchestrated fury. The Primeiro Comando da Capital had launched coordinated attacks across the metropolis. Police stations were bombed. Buses were set ablaze in the streets. Roads became rivers of flames. Dozens died that day. Innocent civilians, rival gang members, even some PCC soldiers who had misstepped. But the real targets were not just lives. They were symbols, a message to the state, to the public, to anyone who thought control still existed. Marcola had planned it all, or rather, he had allowed it. From inside his cell, he was the conductor of a deadly symphony. Every attack, every act of destruction, every fire was not random. Each event was timed, executed with precision, and communicated through a network of loyal soldiers, lawyers, and messages smuggled past the prison walls. São Paulo was his chessboard, and on that day he moved all the pieces at once. The city panicked. Police scrambled to respond. Firefighters ran into burning buildings. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights slicing through smoke. The media reported in horror, broadcasting images of chaos to millions. Citizens fled streets that had once felt familiar. The rich barricaded themselves inside high-rise apartments. The poor took cover in alleys and shanty towns. Every layer of society felt the force of the PCC. Yet, behind the walls of the prison, Marcola remained calm. While governors and mayors called emergency meetings and generals convened strategy sessions, he negotiated from his cell. Peace for a price. order in exchange for compliance. He understood something that politicians often forget. Power isn't about fighting. It is about convincing others to obey. And if the obedience is voluntary, it is even stronger. The attacks were brutal, but they were strategic. No neighborhood was spared, but the targets were deliberate. Public transportation, police stations, and rival factions were chosen carefully. The violence wasn't chaos. It was methodical, surgical, intentional. He wanted the world to see what it meant to underestimate the PCC. He wanted the system to know the government can lock men in cells, but it cannot imprison ideas, cannot contain influence, cannot control loyalty that runs deeper than bricks and bars. In the aftermath, the city lay in shock. Streets reeked of smoke, burned buses were stripped bare. Neighborhoods whispered rumors of hidden networks and hidden leaders. Fear became a currency, and Marcola's name circulated in every conversation. He had proven a fundamental truth. True power does not need to be visible. Uniforms do not define authority. Sometimes, the most dangerous men are those you cannot see. The May 2006 attacks reshaped the landscape of Brazilian crime. Politicians were forced to negotiate, even indirectly, with men they could not touch. Police procedures were rewritten. Emergency protocols were revised. But most importantly, the public learned a lesson the PCC had been teaching quietly for years. Control can be absolute, even from within prison walls. Marcola's philosophy had become doctrine. Violence paired with strategy. Fear paired with diplomacy. Every act was a reminder. Inside the walls, he was untouchable. Outside, he was untouchable still. The PCC didn't just survive that day. It thrived, expanded its influence, and cemented its reputation as an organization not to be challenged, not to be underestimated, and not to be contained. By the time the city tried to recover, the lesson was clear. Power no longer wore uniforms. It could reside behind bars, in shadows, in whispers, in loyalty. And from that day forward, anyone who questioned authority had to remember one truth. Marcola ruled not by force alone, but by the fear and respect he commanded. May 12, 2006 was not just a day of fire. It was a day of revelation, a brutal demonstration that the system could be rewritten, that the invisible hand of the PCC was stronger than any visible shield the state could raise. Marcola spent his days behind concrete walls, surrounded by steel bars, but his mind roamed free. While others around him counted days, sharpened knives, or whispered threats, he counted ideas. He read philosophy, not as an academic, but as a strategist. Nietzsche taught him about the will to power, about transcending weakness. Sun Tzu taught him war without fighting, how to move men like pieces across a board, how to strike without warning. Machiavelli revealed the elegance of calculated cruelty and the necessity of perception over morality. These books were his companions, his tutors, his invisible generals. They shaped a man who could command entire cities without leaving a cell. He did not speak like a criminal. He did not act like one. To outsiders, he could have been mistaken for a scholar or a philosopher. His calm, measured tone, the precision of his words, the clarity of his instructions. These were tools far more dangerous than guns or bombs. In interviews with journalists, he described himself as a product of social hypocrisy, a reflection of a society that had abandoned its poor, ignored its prisons, and left the streets to breed violence. He understood that society's failures had created him, but he refused to let them define him. He turned the same failures into a system of influence, control, and power. To his men, he was not just a leader, he was the brain. Soldiers called him for advice, for instructions, for decisions that would determine life or death. Managers in the streets, coordinators in the prisons, even couriers transporting powder, dope, crystal, or pot, all operated under his strategic vision. Commands were delivered through smuggled phones, coded messages, and trusted intermediaries. No bullet was fired without purpose. No action taken without forethought. Loyalty was built on respect and intellect, not fear alone. Inside the prison, Marcola turned isolation into mastery. Solitude was his laboratory. Each day, he refined rules, studied human behavior, and expanded the reach of the PCC. Where guards saw walls, he saw opportunities for influence. Where other prisoners saw confinement, he saw control. He created a hierarchy that was not visible, but omnipresent. Orders flowed silently, invisibly, but they were followed with the precision of a machine. Every movement, every decision, every act of obedience reinforced the authority he wielded without leaving his cell. He did not need to escape. Escapes, flashy or daring, belonged to men who ruled with strength, with violence. Marcola ruled with intellect. His power had transcended the physical. Guns could be destroyed, soldiers could be arrested, police stations could be burned. But ideas were immortal. And the ideas he planted in the minds of his followers would outlive any jail, any guard, any operation. He educated his men subtly. Conversations, advice, and coded lessons turned impulsive criminals into disciplined operatives. Violence was a tool, but thought was the strategy. Discipline replaced recklessness. Patience replaced impulse. He showed that a prison could be a command center, and men behind bars could influence entire cities. In the eyes of the public, he was a notorious criminal, a gang leader. To the world, he was a shadow figure, trapped behind concrete walls. But in reality, he was an architect. He had built systems, mapped networks, and created loyalty through intellect. While governments focused on enforcement, he focused on innovation. While the police relied on brute force, he relied on strategy. Marcola's philosophy was clear. Power does not come from bullets alone. It comes from ideas. Influence does not require visibility. True leadership does not need applause. By mastering thought, by reading the right books, by understanding human nature, he had turned imprisonment into a throne, a small cell into a seat of empire, and silence into authority. And in that cage, he ruled. Not with fear, not with violence, but with the mind of a strategist, the patience of a teacher, and the vision of a man who understood that the most powerful weapon is the one that moves unseen, unchallenged, and unstoppable. Today, Willians Herbas Camacho, Marcola, remains confined in one of Brazil's most secure cells. Cameras track every movement. Guards patrol every corridor. High walls and razor wires surround him, designed to contain a man who has long proven impossible to control. Yet, despite the layers of security, despite the isolation, the concrete walls, and the endless monitoring, his influence remains vast, unbroken, and omnipresent. The PCC, the organization he shaped and perfected, continues to operate with the efficiency of a state apparatus. It moves stuff by the ton, orchestrates operations with military precision, and exercises authority over prisoners and streets alike, functioning as a shadow government with the reach and discipline that most official institutions cannot match. Marcola's genius was not in acts of violence alone. It was in structure. From his cell, he created a hierarchy, a network, a set of rules, and procedures that outlasted individual men and survived the chaos of arrests, deaths, and prison transfers. Each member, each lieutenant, each operative understood their place in the system. Commands flowed through legal loopholes, smuggled phones, lawyers' briefcases, and coded messages. Nothing was random. Nothing was left to chance. His men were trained to think and act with autonomy, but always within the framework he established. By the time one reached the street, one was more than a criminal. One was a soldier of an institution, a cog in a machine that extended far beyond the cell blocks and the city limits. The PCC's reach is staggering. Its influence penetrates prisons, where it controls inmate populations and even informs policy and administration within the facilities. It reaches neighborhoods and favelas where it enforces order, collects tribute, and adjudicates disputes with a level of authority parallel to the state itself. It moves stuff across borders, regulating powder, dope, crystal, and pot, with accounting and logistics that rival corporate enterprises. Every shipment, every payment, every enforcement action is structured, recorded, and executed according to protocols Marcola designed years ago. Marcola understood that power survives beyond the physical. Guns can be seized, soldiers can be arrested or killed, but systems endure, institutions last, ideas outlive individuals. By transforming a violent gang into an organization, he ensured that his work would not disappear with him. The PCC is now a machine, precise, disciplined, and deadly efficient. And it exists not because of force alone, but because of the rules, order, and strategic vision that he imposed. Even in isolation, Marcola's mind continues to operate as the nucleus of this empire. Every decision, every strategy, every directive filters down from the network he maintains, adapted by those he trained to execute it. He has proven that a man does not need freedom to wield power, that leadership can exist without visibility, and that influence can thrive from within walls designed to suppress it. The legacy of his command extends beyond Brazil's borders. His methods are studied by other organizations, his tactics replicated in prisons across Latin America. He has turned crime into a system, an institution whose efficiency and profitability make it too valuable, too organized, and too entrenched to dismantle completely. Marcola's empire is a lesson in structure, patience, and strategic genius. A criminal mind elevated into governance, a shadow ruler commanding without leaving his cell. And in this cage, the man who began as a boy in the streets of São Paulo has achieved what few leaders, legal or illegal, ever manage. He has built an empire, not with armies outside the walls, but with ideas, rules, and loyalty that flow from within them. A silent hand, a precise mind, a system that endures. He started as a thief, he became a teacher, and in the end, he built an empire without ever leaving his cell.